It has a lot to do with what's known as the tree of death, which is accessed through a region on the Kabbalistic tree of life known as DAATH. This is where the name Darth Vader comes from, ladies and gentlemen. Darth Vader is first of all, the original Star Wars were all about Gnosticism and the Kabbalistic tree of life. The new Star Wars suck. It's an absolute embarrassment what has been done to those films. It is absolutely vile. Mainstream Hollywood is disgusting. Darth Vader is a symbol of Daath. Daath is a part on the Kabbalistic tree of life, which you're seeing on the screen right now. There's a path, a hidden door on the Kabbalistic tree of life that leads to what's known as the dark side of the Force, which is the opposite side of the tree of life, also known as the tree of darkness or the tree of death. This is why Darth Vader, or Darth Vader, represents the Sith, or the opposite side of the Force. Sith has a lot to do with the name Seth, and Seth goes back to Serpent. There's just everywhere. I'm not going to get into all of it in this video, excuse me. I want to try to keep this under an hour, this first piece. I brought up the qliphothic, which is known as, there's the Kabbalistic tree of life, and then there's what's known as the qliphothic tree of life, or the qlipha. We'll talk about that in the near future. I brought up the Kabbalistic tree of life because it has a lot to do with the story, the allegory, the metaphor, the symbolism of the Garden of Eden, which the entire Garden of Eden story, Genesis and the Bible, is a story about processes that are going on within your human physiology, ladies and gentlemen, and it's pretty easy to see once you start waking up. The 33 steps on the stairway to heaven are the 33 vertebrae of the human spine. The 12 apostles of Christ are not only the 12 zodiac signs, which have to do with your organs, your body, you name it, but they're also, ladies and gentlemen, the 12 cranial nerves of the brain. And when the 12 main cranial nerves of the brain wake up, you experience what's known as Christ consciousness. This is when you literally take what's known as the 13th step. I find it really interesting that A Perfect Circle has a album called 13th Step, because the 13th step is when the 12 cranial nerves wake up, ladies and gentlemen, and you take the 13th step into real manhood or womanhood. This is called becoming the Christ, being anointed with the holy oil, the cerebral spinal fluid that climbeth up the spine, the river Jordan, and separates the Red Sea, which are the blood vessels in your back, as it climbs up and gets crucified at the space of the skull by the medulla oblongata, and then rises into your head. I mean, come on, you've been lied to about religion, ladies and gentlemen, and I have no patience for it anymore. If you're offended by this, or if you want to go trust the Bible literally, then go ahead. But there is so much symbolism in the Bible showing that it is a encoded manual of the human body and the awakening of the Kundalini energy. Now, obviously, I don't buy into all of it. I do indeed believe that the God of the Old Testament is the demiurge, just like the Gnostics said, which, the demiurge is just a fancy name for what the Greeks called cosmic raider, or, or what I call the archon. And the archon, the God of the Old Testament, is the one who rules the roost here, the one who runs the show, who wants you to have faith in him and believe that he's the only way to heaven and all this other nonsense. You're going to tell me that you're going to have blind faith in some deity, which, if you study this deity, does a lot of harm to innocent people? You're going to trust him to get you into heaven? What a selfish thing for one, to play all my cards right so I can get into heaven. Get real. Now, again, there's some obvious contradictions in the stuff that I'm talking about, but if you read a little bit closer between the lines, you'll begin to understand that there is stuff, even though mainstream religion is totally whitewashed and bastardized, there's stuff in the Bible that can be used to your advantage that is symbol abundant. Now, when I say that I think that the Bible is evil and mainstream Christianity is evil. I believe that what it has become is 100% evil. That does not mean that the Bibles and the books and the texts that they study are necessarily completely evil, because there's symbolism in them that is monumental. But most Christians don't even read their Bibles, and on top of that, they're not even familiar with the symbolism and what it represents. So we really need to, if we want to wake up from this matrix, become more not symbol illiterate, symbol literate. We need to be able to see things that are right in front of our eyes. They hide everything right in front of us, ladies and gentlemen. It's just done through symbols. But since you're taught to not register symbols with your conscious mind, you just absorb everything through via your subconscious mind, and so the wheel turns. Let's look at the, let's just go back to the Star Wars thing, which has a lot to do with Kundalini. There were groups in Egypt known as the Djed, or the Jedi, D-J-E-D-I. These were individuals who venerated the Gnostic current of waking up the Kundalini. The Jedi, D-J-E-D-I, the Djed pillar. Look it up. The hell is the name of the director of the Star Wars films? George Lucas knew what was up. You even have, ladies and gentlemen, in the original Star Wars film, you have two opposing forces, right? You have the good guys and the bad guys, the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. This represents the two pillars out of the three main pillars on the Kabbalistic tree of life. Look on the screen right now for further verification. These two pillars, you can take this image, the Kabbalistic tree of life, and macro-impose it on the human body. And suddenly it represents a handful of different things. It also represents the dynamic polarity, if you will, of the Ida and the Pingala nadi nerve channels that the Kundalini moves up. This is what creates kind of like an opposing force, like an electrical conduit. You have the positive and negative force on an electrical, in an electrical sense, of these two pillars, which represent the Ida and the Pingala. Please look at the screen right now for further verification. And then you have the main pillar, ladies and gentlemen, that the Kundalini energy rises up like an energy conduit, because you have to have the positive and negative force to create that energy conduit. I hope that makes sense. But again, just to dovetail that and finish that up, Star Wars has a lot to do with the tree of life. And the Kabbalistic tree of life comes from something much more ancient. It comes from we can even trace it as far back as ancient Egypt. We can trace it as far back, ladies and gentlemen, even to ancient Sumer. And I believe there's even depictions, correct me if I'm wrong, of a more, there's depictions of the Kabbalistic tree of life, or what we look at now as the Kabbalistic tree of life. There's depictions of this tree on the cuneiform tablets, or not the cuneiform tablets. I can't remember the exact name of the tablets from ancient Sumer that depict the Anunnaki and whatnot. Zechariah Sitchin goes into deep detail about this in his books, such as, but not limited to, the Genesis Revisited. He's got an entire series on Sumer, the Anunnaki, you name it. So this Kabbalistic tree, I call it the Kabbalistic tree because that's the most modern version of it. It's referred to as the Kabbalistic tree. It has its roots are pretty much in Jewish mysticism, but this Kabbalistic tree is a blueprint of how your human body works, as well as the universe that you live in. But that's besides the point. My point here is, ladies and gentlemen, is that this symbol represents Kundalini. In fact, why don't you do yourself a favor and go to Google right now and type in Kabbalistic tree serpent. The Kabbalistic tree is often depicted with a serpent. Going from the bottom Sephirot, and the Kabbalistic tree is composed of multiple spheres known as Sephira or Sephirot. They're connected, they're representative, or they're symbolic, these spheres of the planetary bodies. It's also representative of the tarot deck, ladies and gentlemen, and the Jewish alphabet. Most people don't realize that the tarot is actually a physical map of this tree. But where was I going with that, ladies and gentlemen? If you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, at the bottom of the middle pillar, there's there's a sphere at the very bottom that's usually depicted in an encircled cross with 4 sections. This is known as Malkuth. This represents the earth realm. And the snake usually is wrapped around this Sephira and climbs up the Kabbalistic tree until it reaches the top. This is representing the Kundalini waking up. In fact, the Kabbalistic tree of life is a map that you can use to actually wake up the Kundalini. Imagine that. And you can path work up the pillars of this tree and work with the angelic kingdom that are contained therein. I mean, this is where and what's beautiful about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that this Kabbalistic tree of life fits inside of the flower of life. It fits inside the seed of life. These geometric patterns, which we find in ancient Egypt, yes, there are what appear to be laser printed or laser carved depictions of the flower of life in ancient Egypt. Read Drunvalo Melchizedek's book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, Volume 1, for more verification on that. But this particular symbol, the flower of life, the seed of life, etc., it's contained within your cells. It is the actual biological, anatomical, spiritual blueprint that spirit uses to weave matter from light, from thought, if you will. Now, obviously, a lot more can be said about that, and I don't want to get into a huge rambling about it, but it's the truth regardless. The flower of life contains all of the 5 Platonic solids. It's the map that what I like to call God uses to create matter. And the tree of life represents the condensing from the top Sephira of all of the cosmic energies being condensed into physical form, which you find in Malkuth. Now, some of this stuff may not make a lot of sense. We'll talk more about it in the near future. I want you to keep listening to this, however, because it's important that you hear it. Now, there's also something, and I'm going to show you on the screen right now, in the realm of Kabbalah, known as the flaming sword. And the flaming sword starts at the top Sephira, and it moves down the tree of life until it exits Malkuth. This has a lot to do with the biblical story of the angels with flaming swords being positioned at the gates of Eden. Now, there's also again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a dark side of the tree known as the qliphothic tree of life. This is really important that you get acquainted with as well. Regardless of what all these people say about how it's evil and all this nonsense, to look at one side of the tree without acknowledging the other is absolute foolishness, and it's called being imbalanced. So in part 2 of this, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go deep into discussing symbolism of Kundalini, whether it be through the caduceus, the Velspear, the thrysis, ladies and gentlemen, also known as the thyrsus by some, Poseidon's staff. What about Shiva's staff? What about there's just so many of them. Excuse me. There are so many symbols leading to this energy. It's the most important energy in the world, ladies and gentlemen, and this is why all of our ancient civilizations and the cultures, etc., venerated it so much. It's not because it wasn't important. It's because it's the foundation of life. Kundalini is the foundation of life that bringeth light into the world, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think the Christ is? Christ is an energy. It's the Kundalini rising. And as I've said in many of my videos, the Kundalini energy, which is a very motherly type energy, awakens in our pelvic floor, which is the throne of God, which is why you see so many ancient depictions of kings and queens sitting on a throne. That represents the coccyx, the pelvic floor. But when this energy awakens, it awakens the Christ consciousness, which is the rising Kundalini. And when the rising Kundalini gets into the brain, you experience Christ consciousness, and through that you get to know God. Just like people say that only through Christ do you know God. Well, it's true. It's just not true in the way that you most likely think it is. But again, that is why you see the kings, ladies and gentlemen, ancient depictions of Shiva or whatever on certain thrones, sitting down with a spear in their hand. They're sitting down on their throne with a spear because that's symbolic of mastery over the lower bone system of the body, the lower chakra system, which I like to call the chakras pylons. It represents dominion over their lower animal nature. You see this depicted often with Archangel Michael subduing, if you will, the dragon. Now, obviously, some people have taken the once accurate symbolism of Michael and made these horrible depictions of him slaying dragons and actually killing the dragon, if you will. But it's more about the original images were more about subduing his lower nature, ladies and gentlemen. And again, Archangel Michael is just one of many deities that symbolizes something much older. Snap out of your trance. Now, what most people refer to as Christ, let's just put it this way. The Gnostics knew, the ancient alchemists knew, that Christ was an energy that can be awoken within man and womankind, just like Christ says in the Bible, ye shall perform miracles greater than I. What do you think that means? It means that we have the ability to wake up the Kundalini just like he had awoken within in his system, Snap out of your trance. The Gnostics knew what was up. So did the Maya, so did all of these other ancient civilizations that raised Kundalini. They just called it something different than, for instance, Christ consciousness. For instance, what about referring to it as the phoenix? What about referring to it as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent? There's so many different names for this energy. So for you to get back there on your high horse and say that Christ is the only way to save your soul and that you have to worship Christ, well, before Christ even was a term, ladies and gentlemen, there were people that were experiencing this energy that were referring to it as something much different, but it was the same unifying body of energy. Snap out of your goddamn trance. I wanted to personally thank you for watching my videos and contributing to the growth of my channel. I could not do this without you, and your interest in my content is truly what motivates me and fuels my passion for making these videos and spreading my message. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I wanted to remind you that this channel is a free educational tool that is listener supported, and if you would like to donate to my channel and donate to my cause, help make my life a little bit easier and help keep the lights on around here, you can do so by checking out the links in the description box below. There's a handful of not only ways to donate to my channel, but I also have links to different websites and different videos of mine, as well as my Amazon store, where you can check out a plethora of different health-related products that I use and recommend. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your continued interest in my message, and until next time, peace be with you all.